We begin in Germany, where police have detained and charged a man on multiple charges of murder and attempted murder following a Christmas market attack in Magdeburg. The suspect, identified as 50-year-old Taleb al-Abdul Mohsen from Saudi Arabia, is accused of driving a car into a crowd, killing 5 people and injuring more than 200 others. A 9-year-old boy was among those killed, including a woman aged between 52 to 67 years. A statement by the Magdeburg Police Department says a suspect has been issued a warrant for pre-trial detention on charges of murder on 5 counts, as well as multiple counts of attempted murder and grievous bodily harm. Police believe the suspect acted alone, details still emerging, indicating this attack is way different from anything Germany has seen before. Meanwhile, it was a somber day for many Germans on Sunday, still reeling in the aftermath of that accident in Magdeburg. And in the accident injured more than 200 people at a Christmas market Friday evening. Authorities are facing questions about security and what they knew about the suspect, accused of using an access lane for emergency vehicles when the accident occurred. The suspect has been ordered into pre-trial detention on counts of murder, attempted murder, and dangerous bodily harm. The suspect, a 50-year-old who labels himself as both a psychiatrist and founder of a Saudi rights movement, has a history of anti-Islamic rhetoric and was arrested at the scene following the 3-minute attack. His motives remain unclear, but Saudi authorities are said to be currently working to collate everything they have on the suspect, identified later as Taleb al-Abdul Mohsen, and would share it with Germany's ongoing investigation. The Saudi Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Riyadh says it had previously warned the German government about al-Abdul Mohsen's extremist views. A look at his social media account suggested he supported anti-Islam and far-right parties, including the Alternative for Germany, AfD, and criticized Germany for its handling of Saudi refugees. Taleb al-Abdul Mohsen was granted asylum by Germany in 2016, 1 year after the former Chancellor Angela Merkel threw open her country's borders to let in more than 1 million migrants from the Middle East, and 10 years after al-Abdul Mohsen had taken up residence in Germany. The incident has shaken residents of Magdeburg. Many describe it as sad and unbelievable. Chancellor Olaf Scholz visited the central German city on Saturday, voicing his sympathy and support for the victims. He called on the nation to stand together against hate. Later in the evening, a large crowd gathered outside the Magdeburg Cathedral, with people holding candles and grieving while watching the church service held outside on a large video screen. German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier, Chancellor Olaf Scholz, and Saxony-Anhalt State Premier Rainer Hasselhoff also attended the service.
Sind wir heute Abend hier im Magdeburger Dom.
The attack has stirred anti-immigration sentiments in some parts of Germany as concerns over security heightens. Authorities are choosing, however, to focus on dispelling fear about another attack either at the Christmas market or elsewhere. Visitors to the market are upset about the car ramming incident, but say it would not stop them from visiting the market. Meanwhile, mourners have been laying flowers and candles in front of a church at the central German city to pay tributes to the victims of the Christmas attack. Germans are still in shock and are searching for answers as to whether more could have been done to avert the attack and whether authorities could have acted on warnings from the Saudi government. Germany's data protection rules are among the strictest in the European Union, which federal police say have prevented them from resorting to biometric surveillance to date. The incident could sharpen a fierce debate in Germany over security and immigration ahead of the national election in February, which opinion polls suggest the far right will perform strongly. One German analyst confirms that Taleb al-Abdul Mohsen, the suspect in the Magdeburg Magdeburg accident, was well known online as an anti-Islamic figure in the global right-wing extremism scene. Representative of Salem, Saxony-Anhalt Advice and Support Center for Prevention of Violence and Radicalization, Hans Goldenbohm, has reiterated this point. He said those who stand against Islam, who leave their home country, especially Saudi Arabia, and are because of that, which is true, that Saudi Arabia is a repressive regime in which critical people are persecuted, deliberately disempowered and persecuted here. And then instead, people are deliberately brought here who pursue an Islamist agenda, so to speak, and want to destroy Western societies in the long term. Joining us now is security analyst Chidi Nwonu, who is in London. Chidi, Merry Christmas to you. I'm sure everyone has been caught up by the spirit of the season. But let's talk about Germany now. Authorities are yet to establish a motive for the suspects. I'm not sure they have already been able to glean that out of him. We already know his background. He's anti-Islamic. He also supports the AfD in Germany. He has some extremist views, which is shared on social media. Do you think this accident is reflective of his beliefs?
Good evening, and thanks for having me. I would say it's a very curious situation right now. One can't really tell whether this person is who is represented or if there is another thing going on behind the scenes. His views seem to veer very much from a deeply anti-Islamic kind of viewpoint to far-right parties, to anti-immigration parties. The Saudis have been very, very quick to jump on this situation and provide receipts, quite detailed receipts as to his activities. But again, one can't verify how these came about or where they came from. So it's an interesting conundrum. But on paper, what you have is an Islamophobic former Muslim who, according to his home country, was a wanted criminal in his country who converted to or came out of Islam and became anti-Islamic because he wanted to avoid deportation. In his argument, he's a political prisoner fleeing unfair persecution in his country. Why he would then choose to perpetrate a crime associated with his Islamic terrorism in Europe is quite curious.
Yeah, what you said about the Saudi government really is curious. They said they warned Germany about Talib Abdul-Mohsen. They also provided, some details for the German government, which it seems they overlooked. Do you think this was, the German government's fault? So they really didn't pay much attention to what information was provided by the Saudi government and never flagged Abdul-Mohsen as a person of interest?
Again, there are many curious issues that are coming out of this. So there seems to be quite a detailed information was given to the German authorities about this fellow. So, but again, we've once got to be clear that normally it takes a long time for this kind of information to come out, but almost instantaneously after the attack, these receipts, as we said, were published. Detailed emails that were sent by Saudis or Saudi nationals to the Germans were published. Again, it's not to say that these things don't happen kind of organically or by themselves, but to find this level of detail and this kind of a very clear timeline of events coming out, it is a little bit suspicious. One doesn't want to jump down the realm of conspiracy theories, but if things are a little bit the world is not really perfect in real life, and if things come across as a little bit too perfect, you're entitled to be a bit suspicious. It doesn't mean that it's not true, that this isn't true, but it's just one has to be a little bit cautious if we take all the narratives that are being presented at face value. It's very strange to have, as I said, a deeply anti-Islamic person who has spent what seems to be a considerable amount of time and effort creating a social media profile that is of a certain political persuasion to perpetrate an attack like this. He didn't target Muslims. He didn't target immigrants. He targeted Germans at a Christmas market. A form of attack, using a vehicle as a weapon, a form of attack that has been popularized by lone wolf Islamic jihadis. The good thing is he's alive. He's been taken alive. So he will be able to give testimony as to what his motivations were and what he was thinking in doing this, and then we'll be able to understand what linkages he may have in his mind, or that might lead from his ideological viewpoint or his alleged ideological viewpoint to his activities.
Well, piggybacking off something you said, the fact that he's anti-Islamic, he didn't attack Muslims, he attacked people who were visiting a Christmas market. What do you call that, in your security circles? The fact that somebody believes something and then goes ahead and acts opposite of what they believe and what they stand for.
I don't have a word for that, but the action could be known as the propaganda of the deed. So there's several types of propaganda, and if we're going to break it down, there's propaganda of the word, which is just speaking. So the kind of things he did, going online, posting, and things like that. Then there's propaganda of the deed, where you commit an action that propagates your narrative, that brings attention to your kind of viewpoint. And through what he's done, he's brought attention to his viewpoint. He has made people see that there is a strong anti-Islamic movement amongst former Muslims. He's brought attention to the fact that there is support for these anti-immigration parties amongst people who are migrants and who are also Muslims. But he's done it in a way that is, again, catastrophic to each of those causes, because one of the strong viewpoints of the anti-migration parties, that their support is boosted every time there is an attack by a migrant. Now, there's an attack by a migrant who supports them. It's a double-edged sword. It could boost their popularity in the run-up to the elections, but it could also be a disaster for them if there were closer, genuine links between these parties and this fellow discovered. So, as I said, it's a mystery wrapped up in a conundrum. There's no understanding as to why he would do such a thing. If he would truly believe that Islam was a problem and migrants were a problem, you would have expected an attack targeted at Muslims, targeted at migrants, in which he would then be able to use that to say to promote his ideology. Instead, what he's done is promote his ideology, but also further, darken it by associating, the far right now with vehicleless weapon attacks.
And the whole incident has raised the whole anti-immigration sentiment in Germany. There was a protest on Sunday. How should the government deal with this?
Well, the German government is in a massive conundrum in relation to many, many, many things, of which this is just one, but it's a big one, because one of the things that is causing a lot of problem for the establishment parties in Germany and across Europe is the issue of migration, the issue of the integration of migrants, the issue of how you deal with what has been a large influx of people from the Middle East in particular, but also a lot from Africa and a lot from Nigeria, to be honest, who have come into Europe. And there were clashes in terms of pressure on resources, for those who are legitimate, hospital places, school places, housing, as well as employment. And for those who are illegitimate, being, in the black economy, not being, earning either under the table or through criminality. And then these who are quite relatively rare, but quite high profile, problematic people who perpetrate these terror attacks. Again, a relatively small number when you consider the millions who are in Europe. But these individuals with their attacks have a massive multiplier effect. And every single crime that is committed by a migrant or anybody who is not just native to Europe, but not born in Europe, it creates a multiplier effect, which has a problem in that very few establishment parties can oppose immigration, not just from ideological point of view, but from an economic point of view. In order to significantly cut down on people flowing into Europe and then around Europe, you would need to reimpose barriers and borders across Europe and within Europe, which goes against the fundamental ideals of the EU, the free movement of people. You can have the free movement of people if you're European, if you're carrying European ID, etc. But that would cut down, that would mean that you would have to put in border checks. You'd have to put in all of the infrastructure that Europe has taken down, or at least scaled back, would now have to be put in place in order to stop people who are non-European from traveling within Europe. So I, as a British citizen, can fly into Europe for a limited amount of time. I can travel around Europe quite freely. Nobody will check my papers. So even though technically I may be only supposed to fly into France, I could travel across the border into Belgium or to Germany without anyone stopping me because there were no checks on the border. If the French or the Belgians were to reintroduce these checks, it would cost a lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of inconvenience, and it would reduce Europe's competitiveness. The second element is obviously the ideological element. Europe wants to move away from its past, which has been characterized by colonialism, by racism, and obviously the horrors of the Second World War, in which there was the genocide of the Jewish people and the Roma people. In order to do that, it wants to try and make sure that it embraces people who mostly come from former colonies and are mostly from countries that were created by European powers. A huge influx of people from Syria in the 2000s. Syria, again, is an artificial country that was made by the French and made by the British, and, from the Turkish Ottoman Empire. Yeah, all of these things, have an impact that, the European countries have to deal with. And unfortunately, the European political class has been unable to challenge, the far-right parties, because the far-right parties are able to say things, the unpalatable things that, they're not able to say. There is a problem of integration. There is a problem of pressure on resources, and there is a problem of a few problematic people causing problems either through terror attacks or through crime, and there is no solution. So to come directly back to your question, the German government has a problem. Either the establishment parties need to confront the issues of migration head on, in that, they're ready to talk about some of the problematic parts of it, but also talk about the realistic benefits of it, in that Europe is aging and not replacing, essentially Europeans are not having enough children. And the Europe needs migrants in order to sustain its level of economic growth. Again, going slightly back in past, a lot of the migration that came into Europe from Algerians were people who came in after the Second World War, because Europe had run out of men because they were slaughtered in the Second World War. These are the problems that Europe has to be able to confront, but is unable to, because nobody is able to have these honest conversations with themselves or with their populations.
Right. And thanks for going around Europe, with that question. I remember the U.S. President-elect Donald Trump, during his tenure from 2016, called for extreme vetting for immigrants to the U.S. You think that's something that could be adopted by European countries? And would it have helped in an instance like this, probably to prevent an accident like this to happen in Germany?
Well, it's quite difficult. I mean, when you say extreme vetting, it's you'd have to question what exactly that means. Do you mean just asking people a few questions, or stereotyping people from a certain position? So there's two answers. The first answer is you can have extreme vetting. As I said, you can just reinstall border controls. That will be one way of dealing with the problem. But many asylum seekers, refugees, migrants will either be coming without papers because they've either deliberately destroyed their papers or lost their papers on the way. Some will be coming from countries where you're unable to get any information about these people from. So they're a complete mystery. Whatever extreme vetting you want to do. And in some places, and in some circumstances, they're genuinely fleeing persecution or some sort of a problem, and they can't go back. So even if you vet them, there's not much you can do about it. You can introduce it, but again, there's a cost, and there was a question as to how effective it would be. The second element is that in this particular circumstance, it would have had very little effect, as in the fellow coming in himself apparently came in quite legitimately and, claimed asylum, quite legitimately, claiming to be persecuted for his views. It's unclear, they could have taken the Saudis at face value, but Saudi Arabia has a reputation for persecuting dissidents. So it could have been that it was considered that the criminal cases against him were because he was a dissident. Where the German authorities did fall down were that there were fairly detailed reports, allegedly, that came in about this fellow that they didn't take seriously. Now, if all of this is true, then that's where the biggest problem with this case comes through. because of the nature of migration nowadays, with people coming in through all manner of means, many people come in as students and just overstay, or holiday visas and overstay, or a small proportion come through across the Mediterranean, or walking through Turkey and whatever it is, or are now being flown in through Russia, Belarus into Europe. It's going to be very difficult to vet these people. But I think the European political class will definitely need to think of ways in which they're going to tackle this problem, because the backlash will be worse if more and more of these attacks come, if there's more and more pressure on resources, and there's no guaranteed kind of a replacement for or guaranteed benefit which accrues to the people of Europe.
Thanks again, Chidi, for speaking with us on the program. We wish you a Merry Christmas.
Thank you very much, and have a good day.
You can hear his kids in the background, excited. Let's segue now into France, where President Emmanuel Macron has held a minute of silence at the Élysée Palace for victims of Cyclone Idai in Mayotte after his recent visit to the overseas territory. President Macron was accompanied by his wife, Brigitte Macron. French and European flags were also seen flying at half-mast. The French president has faced criticism from some Mayotte residents who say that the government's response has been sluggish to the cyclone disaster. Also observing a minute silence for victims of the cyclone is Prime Minister François Bayrou outside of his office at Magnon Hotel, even though France is still awaiting a new government. Appointments for ministers will not be announced before the end of today to take into account the day of mourning for cyclone-hit Mayotte. We're learning, however, from local authorities in Mozambique that Cyclone Idai has killed 94 people since it made landfall in the East African country on Friday. The National Institute of Risk and Disaster Management adds that 768 people were injured and more than 622,000 affected by the natural disaster. Idai hit Mozambique on December 15th, a day after wreaking havoc on the French island of Mayotte. President Macron called for a nationwide remembrance during his visit to the island last week. It is feared that hundreds, possibly thousands of people died in Idai when they made landfall in Mozambique. With just a few weeks left before he exits office, U.S. President Joe Biden has commuted the sentences of 37 out of 40 federal death row inmates, switching their penalty to life in prison without parole. The three excluded from the measure include the Boston Marathon bomber and the man who killed Jewish worshippers in 2018. In a statement, Biden said he was more convinced than ever that, in his words, we must stop the use of death penalty at the federal level. His measure does not include more than 2,000 people convicted to death by state authorities. Among those reprieved by Biden are 9 people convicted of murdering fellow prisoners, 4 for murders committed during bank robberies, and 1 who killed a prison guard. Disgraced former New Orleans police officer Len Davis, who operated a drug ring involving other officers and arranged a woman's murder, is among those who have been shown clemency. The 3 remaining on death row include Zhorka Zinaev, who helped carry out the 2013 Boston Marathon bombing, and avowed white supremacist Dylan Roof, who shot and killed 9 black churchgoers in Charleston, South Carolina in 2015. Panamanian President José Raúl Mulino has reaffirmed the country's sovereignty over the Panama Canal after U.S. President-elect Donald Trump threatened to retake the canal. In an audio recording released on social media platform X, President Mulino said, "Every square meter of the Panama Canal and its adjacent areas belong to Panama and will continue to belong to Panama." He also defended the passage rates Panama charges, saying they were not set on a whim. Trump threatened on Sunday to reassert U.S. control over the Panama Canal, accusing Panama of charging excessive rates to use the Central American Passage.
When they gave it to Panama, can you believe that We would never have done it if we thought what's happening now can happen, and we would never, and we will never, ever let it fall into the wrong hands. But it's falling into the wrong hands. It was not given for the benefit of others by a token of cooperation, but it was given to Panama and to the people of Panama, but it has provisions. You got to treat us fairly, and they haven't treated us fairly. If the principles, both moral and legal, of this magnanimous gesture of giving are not followed, then we will demand that the Panama Canal be returned to the United States of America in full, quickly, and without question. I'm not going to stand for it. So to the officials of Panama, please be guided accordingly. When President Jimmy Carter foolishly gave it away for $1. During his term in office, it was solely for Panama to manage and not for China or any other country to manage. You see what's going on there? China. The United States is the #1 user of the Panama Canal, with over 72% of all transits heading to or from U.S. ports. Think of that. So we built it. We're the ones that use it. They gave it away. Considered one of the one of the great wonders of the world. The Panama Canal opened for business 110 years ago and was built at huge cost to the United States, and it really is big when you consider the lives and the treasure, the equivalent of $1.2 trillion today. You don't hear those numbers.
Staying in the United States, a woman has been killed after she was set on fire on a subway train in Brooklyn. Police say a man has been arrested in New York in connection with the incident, describing it as one of the most depraved crimes a person could commit against another human being. The woman had been on a stationary train to Brooklyn when she was approached by a man who used a lighter to ignite her clothing. The victim died at the scene as a suspect was apprehended following a tip-off from a group of high school students. 10 members of a family have died after a private plane crashed into the city of Gramado in southern Brazil. Brazilian businessman Luis Claudio Galizzi, who was piloting the plane, was killed in the crash alongside his wife, 3 daughters, and other family members. The small plane reportedly hit the chimney of a building, as well as a house and a shop, as it fell. Local authorities say 17 people on the ground are injured in the accident, including 2 in serious condition. Russia has debunked reports that Asma Assad, wife of the ousted Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, is seeking to be divorced from her husband. It comes after Turkish media suggested she wanted to end her marriage and leave Russia, where she and her husband were granted asylum after rebel coalition overthrew the former president's regime and took control of Damascus. Russian government spokesperson Dmitry Peskov addressed the issue during a press conference today, saying, no, they do not correspond to reality. He also denied reports that the Assads had been confined to Moscow and that his property assets had been frozen. Turkish media has suggested the Assads live under severe restrictions in the Russian capital and that the former Syrian First Lady had filed for divorce and wanted to return to London. Mrs. Assad is a dual Syrian-British national, but the UK Foreign Secretary has previously said that she would not be allowed to return to Britain. Crowds gathered in central Belgrade on Sunday to protest Serbia's government in a wave of demonstrations that have taken place regularly since a deadly disaster at a railway station last month. The protest, which was organized by various groups, including students and farmers, held up banners, waved their phones and torches, and let off fireworks in the city's Slavia Square. The concrete awning of the recently renovated roof at the station in the city of Novi Sad caved in on November 1st, killing 14 people and injuring 3 others, with 1 person later dying of their injuries. Opposition leaders and the public have taken to the streets, reportedly blaming the accident on government corruption and nepotism that resulted in shoddy construction. The ruling coalition denies those charges, and President Alexander Vučić says those responsible must be held to account. An Israeli airstrike has killed 2 people in Gaza's Khan Yunis. This happened over the weekend. People inspected the remains of a car hit by the strike. Israel began its assault in Gaza after Hamas-led fighters attacked Israeli communities on October 7, 2023, killing 1,200 people and taking more than 250 others hostage. Around half of the 100 hostages taken by the Gaza militants are still believed to be alive. Authorities in Gaza say Israel's campaign has killed more than 45,000 Palestinians. Most of the population of 2.3 million has been displaced, and much of the coastal enclave is in ruins. Well, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Israel would continue acting against the Iran-backed Houthis in Yemen, whom he accused of threatening world shipping and the international order. He's also called on Israelis to be steadfast. On Thursday, Israeli jets launched a series of strikes against energy and port infrastructure in Yemen, and a move officials say is a response to hundreds of missiles and drones attacks launched by the Houthis since the start of the Gaza war 14 months ago. The Israeli government shared images on Sunday of Netanyahu's security cabinet meeting in northern Israel, where the officials examined weapons and war materials it said were seized in the south of Lebanon. They also visited a mock tunnel and a mock command center that the Prime Minister's office said was similar to those found during operations in Lebanon. The Houthis have launched repeated attacks on international shipping in waters near Yemen since November 2023 in support of the Palestinians over the war with Hamas. Slovakia's Prime Minister Robert Fico has made a surprise visit to Moscow for talks with President Vladimir Putin, becoming the third Western leader to meet the Russian president since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine 3 years ago. Fico, a vocal critic of the European Union's support for Kyiv and the war, said that they discussed supplies of Russian gas to Slovakia, which his country relies on. A deal with Russian gas giant Gazprom to transit energy through Ukraine to Slovakia is due to expire at the end of this year. Ukraine has signaled its intention not to renew that deal. Fico says President Putin has been wrongly demonized by the West. Moving slightly into Africa now, in neighboring South Sudan, the internally displaced people living in a camp near the capital, Juba, have recently received vaccination against cholera as the disease spreads to many other parts of the country. South Sudan's first case of the latest cholera outbreak has been reported at Renk Transit Center for refugees and returnees fleeing conflict in neighboring Sudan. Many of those afflicted are people living in the internally displaced persons camps where sanitation is poor, exposing them to higher risk of infection. The worst hit area is the oil-rich Unity State, recording more than 3,000 cases of cholera, with at least 79 people dead.
The vaccine is important, very critical part of the intervention, but at the same time, it should be also complemented with extra WASH intervention, surveillance, early detection and treatment. So it's a combination of intervention.
Here in Lagos, the state government has warned prospective event managers in the state to ensure strict compliance to safety measures during the Yuletide season and beyond. The state government says it is doing everything to prevent accidents in any form in public places. It's also urging residents to prioritize their safety at all times. Speaking during a joint press conference organized by the State Ministry of Special Duties and Intergovernmental Relations and Ministry of Information and Strategy, Mr. Gbenga Omotosho, said the move becomes necessary following incidents of stampede in some parts of the country, as well as reported incident of a stage collapse at a beach event in Victoria Island. Also speaking is the Commissioner for Special Duties and Intergovernmental Relations, Mr. Gbenga Oyerinde. He urged Lagos residents to be their brother's keeper by monitoring happenings in their environment while enjoining them to always call the toll-free numbers 767 and 112 in case of emergency. Also addressing the press conference, the Director General of Lagos State Safety Commission, Mr. Larry Mujola, says event planners must follow safety rules, and residents or anyone who wish to do charity for people over 250 must engage the agency through its website, www.lasgsafetyreg.com.
We got reports that on Seoul Beach that there was a stage collapse during a show. Fortunately, nobody died in that incident. And this has made us to say that we should not allow the matter to just lie low like that, and we should use it as a kind of signal that people should watch out, that we do not want such incidents anymore. And for us in Lagos State, we have adequate preparation for very big events, but we need the cooperation of Lagosians to ensure that nobody in this season, where everybody, the whole world is celebrating, loses his or her life. That is why we are here today, to warn Lagosians that should you decide to gather any crowd at all, to distribute things, to have a show, no matter the kind of show at all, you should be able to consult with the Safety Commission.
And we are all gathered there so that Lagosians will know that we are serious about this. It's not about keeping your whatever you see that is going to be harmful to your neighbor. You need to cry it out. And then in the event where there is an emergency, we have a toll number that Lagosians have been used to. And I still want to re-emphasize that number, which is 767 and 112. This should be kept on our head, and to at all time, whenever there is an issue of emergency, I think this toll number can be called upon. Toll free. It's toll free, and that you will see response, and all emergency responders will react accordingly.
And we've had a very robust system of ensuring that we identify events, large events in the state, through our platform, www.lasgsafetyreg.com. And over time, we registered nothing less than 150,000 events across the states. This has helped considerably in reducing to the barest injuries, incidents that could lead to fatalities in this. For any event in the state that is above 250 people, there is a need for you to register through that platform that I just mentioned.
I would just like to inform our viewers on the DSTV platform. We'll be switching over now to go live to the Unto Us a Child is Born Carol holding in Owerri, the Imo State capital, at the Government House Cathedral in Imo State. Once again, this is only for our viewers on the DSTV platform. Of course, you can catch up The World Today fully on YouTube much later. For the rest of our viewers, let's continue the program. Four other stories now. For the past couple of weeks, supporters of the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act have been lobbying Congress to include language renewing the program and the emergency funding bill to avoid a government shutdown on December 20. A cornerstone of U.S.-Africa trade relations, AGOA, offers duty-free access to U.S. markets for qualifying sub-Saharan African countries, but it's due to expire at the end of September of 2025. And lobbyists for the program had identified the House Ways and Means Committee, which oversees trade, as their gateway into the continuing resolution end of the year bill. But the compromise bill released on the evening of December 17 does not include the provision. Despite bipartisan support for AGOA, partisan squabbles appear to have doomed its passage. Democrats on the Ways and Means Committee, led by Richard O'Neill of Massachusetts, were not overly enthusiastic about a rushed reauthorization that did not include stronger labor and environmental standards. I want to bring in now international national security law and foreign relations expert Joanna LeBlanc. Joanna, how are you? Merry Christmas. Probably our last conversation, I hope not, with you before the end of the year. But let's quickly talk AGOA. American lawmakers don't seem to be excited about, whatever reauthorization there is supposed to be to this. And this deal ends in September of 2025. Why do they feel there is a deficit in America's relations, trade relations, that is, with Africa?
First and foremost, thank you so much for having me, Amarachi. And happy holidays to you and the team at Channels Television. But as it relates to AGOA, I don't think that the U.S. government or the Republican Party has anything against the renewal of AGOA. I think the issue was that in the particular continuing resolution, the Republicans wanted a clean bill. They wanted a bill that focuses on just keeping the government open until March. But however, the initial continuing resolution legislation that was introduced had a number of other issues that the Republican Party, in particular the incoming administration, did not believe were necessary to address at this time. So therefore, AGOA was not added, and a number of other foreign affairs related matters were not added in the continuing resolution. In fact, there was Hope Help, which is another trade preference legislation that impacts the Republic of Haiti, that was initially in the first draft of the continuing resolution that was ultimately removed by the time the third one came around. But again, ultimately, the incoming administration really wanted a clean legislation, not a legislation that has a lot of other things in it. Because what usually happens in Congress is towards the end of the year, you'll see legislation such as the CR or the National Defense Authorization Act that are filled with all sorts of bills that different members could not get passed throughout the year. They kind of use that process as a way to get legislation that they could not get consensus on to be passed in a very fast manner.
So a new government comes in January of 2025, and then the House as well as the Senate will most likely be controlled by Republicans. What is the future of AGOA at this point?
I think considering that, Mr. Trump, which the incoming administration, there's a great deal of work that's being done to counter China's influence around the world, not just China, but obviously Russia as well. And I think right now, the best economic tool that the United States has when it comes to the African continent is really AGOA. So I do think ultimately AGOA is going to be renewed. And I think it's also an opportunity for African countries to ensure that the newly renewed AGOA is one that reflects the needs on the ground. And also a renewed AGOA needs to be one that is consistent with the African Continental Free Trade Area, and that it does not undermine it, and that it complements it. So I think while it's rather, some would look at it as though it's unfortunate that it did not pass this Congress, but I think that it's also an opportunity for African governments to lobby Congress and the administration to ensure that AGOA is one that is reflective of the needs of the continent. Because as you know, Amarachi, the last time that AGOA was renewed was about 10 years ago, and the continent has changed significantly. The population has increased. Priorities around trade relations have definitely changed. So I think this will give African governments ample time to lobby the administration to ensure that a renewed AGOA is consistent with the needs of the people on the continent.
So, Joanna, what would happen to, just wondering how you're interpreting this message for African investors who already have, trade and services and goods just waiting to get into the U.S. How would what has happened in Congress affect them?
I think that with investors, they wanted the legislation renewed as soon as possible because they wanted a degree of certainty, right? They wanted to be sure that the trade preference bill would be renewed, right? So I think that's the biggest concern. But I think that investors should not be concerned about that. I think that it is certain that it would be renewed. I don't see any circumstances where it would not be renewed. I just don't see that happening because, again, it is one of the biggest legislation that the United States has to counter China on the continent. However, you have countries like South Africa. I think that should be concerned a bit. As you know, China, the U.S. has maintained that South Africa, in a way, has undermined its national security through its relations with countries like Russia. And in the trade legislation, there is language that makes it very clear that if a country's policies undermine the national security interest of the United States, those countries would be reconsidered. But also, it's an opportunity for countries like Uganda, for example, that was removed due to its anti-LGBTQI+ legislation, to lobby Congress to be added, because as we know, this incoming administration is not so much concerned about LGBTQI+ rights in this country.
Right. I guess there are still other issues to be ironed out here, Joanna, and I'm sure we'll be reaching out to you to iron out those issues for us. Thanks again for speaking with us, and Merry Christmas once again.
Happy holidays to you and the family at Channels Television. It has been an honor appearing on this network for the past year. Thank you.
Same here. Well, we're gradually coasting home, and train rides, meeting Santa, and ice skating are some of the activities on offer at the Al Barari Winterfest in Dubai. Known for transforming Dubai into a winter wonderland, the festival provides 2 weekends of Christmas festivities for both children and grown-ups. Such a shame we couldn't see the pictures, but this one you can see. Christmas joy still in gear in Germany despite the Magdeburg Christmas village attack. Lights turning on at the Christmas house in Bauhausen. The eyes of visitors young and old begin to glow as 45,000 lights illuminate the nativity scene in front of Josef Glogger's house in the Swabian village near Gausenberg. For more than 20 years, he's been doing this. So they've been on display every day from 5 p.m. to 11 p.m. from the beginning of December to mid-January. It takes the Christmas house owner 6 weeks to prepare this, to set up all of the illuminated figures with their fairy lights and their cables. But it's worth it for him, a project he started with his wife many years ago. But she was diagnosed with leukemia about 3 years ago and died last year. Joseph does this in her memory. Sure, there are many more Christmas lights where you are, but thanks for watching The World Today. I'm Amarachi Ubani.